guest of the season is Pastor Mitchell Perez from the home church in Rowland Heights, a very ardent advocate of the house church movement. He himself a leader in this area, in this region. And if you ever go to his website and if you ever go to listen to his sermons, an amazing, amazing leader, one of Christ's many churches. Please welcome Pastor Mitchell. Won't you say hi? Well, obvious question is, I hate to turn the attention to the obvious, the coronavirus. We were just speaking earlier off camera how you are doing your services online, and you mentioned that you do the YouTube premiere thing. You actually do like a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle, where you do your pre-recorded sermon, and then you have a team that records that, and then it's all stitched together. How is it stitched together? How does that processing work?
We're really blessed because we have someone on our staff, and that's part of her job now. It got added to her job description. So she'll spend the bulk of Saturday putting together, the various aspects of our corporate worship service.
Wait, is this the same person that works for you in the office?
Yeah.
She's the smart lady that does all the admin stuff, the UCLA student.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny to call her a lady because she's like, 19.
Young, she's young. Old. Yeah. Wow. You have a dynamo in your.
No, yeah, she's a
that's
beast.
Good. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're super lucky to have her.
I remember last time I visited you, it was at the church. You had this very small space office. Do you still go to your office, or do you do all your work from your home and then at the sanctuary?
I am. I share that office with two other pastors.
Right. I saw that.
And so one of the pastors is mostly using it, and
okay.
We're just trying to be a little wise with the social distancing. So for the most part, he has that office, and the other two, myself included, we work from home. So this is the room I sleep in. This is the room that I now work out of too.
And this room is in your home, in your apartment.
Yeah, the room that I'm in right now, this is my bedroom.
Okay. Wow. The next question is about the house church. Now, our house churches, we have two that are very active, which is we call it Bangkok House Church and then Tijuana House Church. Our shepherds, we meet online on Zoom.
Nice.
So one of the things that we've been missing out on because of the physical distancing that's mandated is that we can't share a meal together, which is a huge part of house church, right? I mean, it has such an evangelistic intention, which is to invite on non-churchgoers to come and join in the meal and all that. But that has been kind of sort of stripped away from us. And I noticed recently online, I saw your church doing this really very cute and clever thing, a video production of like people passing the snacks around and then like another. Would you tell me more of who did that and how he got inspired and how you're dealing with that, the absence of food in your fellowships, in your house churches?
Man, great questions. So shout out to Rachel Park, who just, I think, impromptu fashion, just sent out a message to our private Facebook group for church members. And she just wanted to do something fun and told us to give us simple instructions for eating a snack and passing it to the right.
Yeah.
And she compiled that. But, Charlie, I will say, I think, and we were just talking about this yesterday I was talking to Rachel, and we were talking about how this season of quarantine has allowed us to be more creative and more intentional in how we experience community as a church. And so we've seen people, like myself included, there's several of us that have been just delivering food to each other. We obviously can't go inside and enjoy it together, but we'll just do little drive-bys, drop off, a boba drink, drop off some food to bless people. And then, as a church, one of the things that one of our shepherds actually came up with was this idea. We call them virtual communities. And these are different than our virtual house churches on Friday.
Okay.
And long story short, we have, I think, 7 or 8 of these now, but different members of the church can lead an interest-based or hobby-based virtual community. And we've got one that's like an online poker one that's just about to start. We've
Okay.
got a Korean drama one, a Netflix one. We've got a board game one. I'm leading the diet and fitness one, which
Okay.
yeah,
Nice.
that's
Very
not
nice.
because I'm a pro, but because I'm trying to just force some accountability.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but yeah, we're doing this as one of the ways to combat boredom. Another way to experience more community because we're stuck. And then I think the thing for me that I'm most passionate about is we're trying to use it as a way to reach out to other quarantined non-Christians,
Mm.
which we call VIPs at our church.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so we've got those virtual communities going, and yeah, one of our shepherds, Chad Espinoza, came up with the idea. I thought it was brilliant, and our church has responded well. There's a lot of people in those virtual communities, and even some non-Christians as well.
Awesome. Wow. Man, like on the way here, I had a bunch of questions, but they're not, because I don't do this written down. It's not like so formal. I don't.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
like an actual. It's like I really am a believer in improvisation.
Well, you're suffering from the same condition that my wife has.
What's that?
Well, sometimes when I talk with her, I take her breath away and her thoughts away.
You're actually a very quick on your feet. I remember that's always been my impression of you since I ever first met you. You're very you first of all, you're younger. How old are you? Like 30 something, 32, 33.
So
I
if
want
we
to
go
say.
by numerical age, I'm 32. But if we go by the amount of gray in my hair,
It's like
which is hard to
72.
see, yeah, I'm 72. That's right.
Yeah. You guys have a real tight knit community. Really, uh, other than the positive things that I can obviously see that you're able to draw from the situation. What have been some difficulties for you and your people at your church
Yeah.
because of the quarantine?
Well, first on a personal level, I'm an extrovert. I'm a people person,
Yeah.
and this I've been telling the people at church just how hard it's been for me, just as a people person, extrovert, and also just a lover of my flock, to
Yeah.
be away from them. So I was thinking about the Apostle Paul, and I preached on this like 6-7 weeks ago when they first announced out here in California that we were going on this stay-at-home order.
Yeah.
But I was talking about how Paul in Philippians chapter 1, he's in a Roman prison, and he's talking about how he's yearning, he's longing to see them. And I just can't imagine, he helped plant and pastor that church, and brought them the gospel, the love that he must have felt for them that was reciprocated, and it was cut off. And I sense that I've been more greatly able to experience some of that longing to be with our church people. But obviously we still have some means of communication with them. But yeah, I think that's been hard for me. Just to be away, not to be able to touch people has been hard for me. That's been very difficult to
The
not give hugs.
embrace. The embrace.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, I'm
sure.
Hispanic, so
Yeah, I know.
yeah.
I
But
know.
actually, you're more Hispanic than me.
I don't know about that. I think that I've been quite anglicized in the last decade or so. I've become, since
Yeah,
going to seminary and being like washed with Reformed theology and whatnot. It wouldn't be an exaggeration if people call me banana or something.
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there's a multi-layer for me
Well,
because
if you're a banana, then I'm a
I'm a
coconut. How about that?
I'm a very what do you call it? That's funny. I'm a very like uh like a bag of many different things.
Yeah.
So that's been a tough thing for you. The lack of the physical distance has been actually tough for you.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
So now on Mondays,
Yes.
so Mondays has become my errands day, where
Okay.
I'll run errands for our family.
Yeah.
But really, it's just an excuse to get out and be around people, even
Oh.
strangers.
Oh.
I don't know about you, but a lot of people are stressed out to go to a store.
Yeah.
For me, I'm stressed out being stuck at home all day.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh
and,
yeah.
I'll,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'll do all the protective things of keeping
Yeah.
distance and not touching people and wearing the mask. But I just want to be where people are.
Yeah. It must feel like a house arrest. Just
Oh
being at
yeah,
home.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Well, I've never been under house arrest, but
Yeah. I mean, if we imagine what it's like, if
yeah,
you imagine house arrest must feel like this.
yeah.
Now, a little bit about house church for those listeners I have friends who are in the ministry who have not been on to the house church movement, and I think that it has great many strengths, the house church movement,
Yeah.
and I wanted you to kind of speak briefly, touch upon some of the essentials.
Yeah.
As I don't know if you've seen on my podcast, but I had Chan Do and Luke Chan as
Uh-huh.
our guests, and I don't know if you remember Sean Kim from Houston. Sean Kim
Yeah.
and his wife, they were lovely to join us and to do the podcast for us. And both times we're asking a little bit more about the house church.
Mm.
There's something really exciting about this idea of recovering the
Mm.
New Testament model of the church. And
Yeah.
also, I was looking at some books, theology books, and my former systematic theology teacher, he calls it a shepherding movement.
Mm.
And there were some names that he talked about. I didn't quite get that from any of the books that I got from Houston, but just the basics. Like
Yeah.
as a seasoned, I'd say you're a pretty seasoned house church pastor now, like 3 years now.
Yeah. Well, Pastor Eric heard that. I don't know if he would call me seasoned because
You're
my
getting there. I think you're definitely
3 years,
getting there.
my 3 years compared to his like 20 plus, you know.
Oh, he's the guru for sure. But you're the one of the elite apprentices. That's for sure. You're a disciple
Okay.
of Eric. Yeah.
Yeah, he could be I could be his Padawan. I'll go with that.
So if you would just share a little bit about how I'm sure you have developed your own kind of way of viewing it. Share with the rest of us
Yeah,
the advantage of being house church.
sure. Yeah, I think it comes down to what do you believe the purpose of the church is?
Okay.
And if you arrive to the conclusion that I've arrived to, that the purpose of the church is to reach the lost and make them disciples of Christ, then I think the next natural question is, okay, what is the most effective and biblical way to accomplish that?
Mm.
And for me, when the house church, I'll describe the house church a little bit more in depth too. But for me, I see it as a very effective and biblical way to experience the purpose of the church. And so, I think in a nutshell, the house church movement that we're a part of, because there's a lot of different types of house church models and movements. There's different denominations and movements that and people that express it differently. I would describe it as this hybrid model between you're meeting in homes and recognizing those homes as New Testament churches, but also there's still a corporate gathering on Sundays where a lot of people, where more people come together in a united fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, one of the things that really drew me to it was the church that I'm at right now. This is actually the second church plant that I've been a part of in this city. And in the first church plant, I was really wrestling with the idea that I'm finally the head pastor of my church, and now I can do this however I want. And I remember thinking like, okay, if I was to only use the New Testament as my guideline, what should we do as a church? And I remember one day I wrote down a list of things that the New Testament church did, or that Paul's letters to churches refer to or imply. And this list gets long. It's like, okay, we need to be praying together. Okay, we need to be studying the scriptures. Okay, we need to be fellowshipping, experiencing koinonia, Lord's Supper, communion, church discipline. You make this long list, evangelism. And then I thought, okay, how do I do all of that in 90 minutes on a Sunday? And then I was like, obviously that's impossible. And so in the house church model that we're a part of, it divides all of the primary aspects of New Testament church life into three categories. And we call those the three axes. And, you have your Sunday corporate worship. You have, that's separate from Bible study. And then Bible study is separate from the house church meeting on Fridays. And each one of these three areas covers different aspects of fulfilling New Testament commands, as well as ministering to a different part of the human. So there's this idea that we experience more fuller conversion and spiritual growth when all faculties of the human are engaged: emotion, mind, and will.
Yeah.
And so, Sunday worship, we're primarily addressing the will. Bible study, we're primarily addressing the mind. And house church, we're primarily addressing emotions.
Huh.
And so,
Huh.
that's kind of in a nutshell what it's all about. And there's this pursuit and this desire to reach non-Christians, those,
Yes.
those that are far from Christ. And so, yeah, it's like for a lot of us that grew up in the church is more of a place that's a learning center and a social club, but not a rescue mission operation, which we know from the New Testament, we know from the words of Christ that that's one of the things that we have to do. We have to make disciples. We have to preach the gospel. We have to reach the lost. And so how are we as churches and church members and pastors fulfilling that, And so
Which
how should
leads
we to address that?
nice segue to the next question that I've had. I remember you sharing with me that in your heart, even though you're a pastor, you have a heart of an evangelist.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful thing. What are some things that what you would say to an unbeliever? Like, I know that the whole reason why you're excited about house church is because of this potential, of this the high efficacy of unbelievers having an entryway into the body of Christ.
Yeah.
But is there some message that you could kind of sum it up? Like, what would you say to an unbeliever who's been very toughened by years of unbelief and just living his or her life? I mean, it should be, I'm sure the message should be customized, but is there like something that you want to you're just always at the edge of your seat because of this opportunity you want to talk about Jesus? Like, what are some things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to be completely honest, I personally don't have a go-to move or a go-to line.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of this idea that, like in baseball, every time you go up to the plate, you want to hit a home run for sure.
Sure.
You want to hit you want to hit it out of the park.
Yeah.
And when I talk to someone, I want them to fall on their knees, realize like I need Jesus, and lead them into a prayer of accepting Christ for sure.
Yeah.
But there's also this idea of you have to take what's given to you. You have to take what's pitched to you.
Right.
And so
I like that a lot.
yeah. And so a lot of times it's difficult because what seems the most wise is actually not to press too hardly on the proclamation of the gospel, but instead focus on just loving that person, relationship, getting to know them.
Yeah.
And this is interesting too, because one of the things that I think is important for American pastors and American Christians to understand is that America is a post-Christian culture in a lot of senses.
Yeah.
And then so like Tim Keller talks about this. Tim Keller, the pastor in Redeemer Presbyterian in New York, he says that the apostles never had to evangelize a context like we have to evangelize to. He says the apostles always had to evangelize to cultures that believed in metaphysical reality. They believed in supernatural reality, that you didn't have to convince them that those things existed. They already had pagan deities.
Right.
In America, that's actually questioned, like due to the rise of naturalism. And then there's that issue. And then there's also the issue that a lot of Americans in our culture have experienced some form of Christianity and the gospel. We might say it's a twisted or perverted form, but they've tasted to some degree church and Christianity and Bible, and many of them have spewed it out, believing that it's not worth their time and effort. And then there's all these hypocritical examples, preachers just stealing money from people and corruption and all sorts of things like that. So we have to recognize that we're fishing in a pond where the fish have to some degree experienced it, and the same mission field environment that the book of Acts and the apostles had, where they're learning the gospel and Christianity for the first time, that may not exist with us. So we have to regain a certain credibility with them in order
Right.
to have permission to share the gospel with them.
So by what you say, relationship, developing that, making the move relational is an imperative. It's a must.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can't love
Okay.
God without loving neighbor.
Yeah, can't do that. And it has to be genuine without agenda. I noticed that a lot of the evangelistic efforts that we make is that whenever we approach a person, it's already with an ulterior motive. We
Mm,
want to bring them to the church. We want to kind of sway them to our belief. And that motive in itself, it's like one of those catch-22 situations. In order for us to fulfill our Christian lives as Christians and as ministers, we have to have that as at the forefront of our mind. That's a duty. That's the primary, most the biggest and most important task. But that agenda,
mm,
uh, precisely, it is that agenda that betrays our intention. We want to
mm,
love them, but
yeah,
are we really loving them if we're going with the agenda? So we got to lay the agenda aside and
yeah,
focus on the person, and that it becomes a kind of a tricky dance, I think,
definitely.
because
There's
yeah,
there's a necessary tension in that, because
yes,
the other extreme, of course, is you're always building this relationship as a believer, but then you never pull the trigger on actually giving that proclamation of the gospel or giving that invitation to church, or in our church we call it house church, inviting them over in that way. And so there's that necessary tension where you're like, man, is now the time? Is this the time that I
yeah,
take a big swing, or is this
yeah,
the
yeah,
time that I
yeah,
take the pitch?
yeah. I love your baseball analogy. But how do you feel these days when you're preaching
Yeah,
without an audience? Do you feel like it's harder preaching without an audience, or
definitely harder to preach without an audience for me,
yeah,
especially because there's all these small things that we do as pastor preachers where, as we're preaching to a live audience, we're looking at facial expressions.
yeah,
If I can sense that people are missing something I might have said, I might restate it in a different way right there on the spot.
mm.
Um, my church doesn't know this, but I like to look and stare at people who are nodding off, just to give them a little bit of
Yeah,
pressure.
sure,
Yeah, yeah,
sure,
use eye
yeah,
contact, or
yeah,
and then I like to reference people from the church, like right there on the spot, like, isn't that right, James? I might say, and then it,
right.
it, it sends this message
Interactive,
to the whole church, like, oh,
yeah,
he might call on me.
yeah,
Just a fun way to keep people awake. But yeah, it's definitely harder in that sense. And to be honest, I appreciate this about God. There's a lot of things I appreciate about him, but when I was younger, I used to think I was hitting him out of the park all the time. When I was like in my early 20s,
okay.
I became a pastor my church made me a pastor when I was 20 years old.
I know, that's so crazy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then in more recent years, it's very rare that I feel like I hit it out of the park.
Okay.
Normally, I feel there's this constant feeling of, man, I should have studied
Uh,
more. I should have
yeah,
spent
yeah,
less time on watching YouTube late at night this
yeah,
week and more time to sermon prep.
yeah.
But I'm really blessed. Just 2 weeks ago, one of our members posted this article, or this it was a Facebook post actually, and it was basically saying, it was a message to church members saying, hey, you need to reach out to your pastors and understand that pastors that are preaching to you right now are, a lot of them are struggling because they're removed from being with you, and so go out of your way. They have no idea how their sermons have been received.
Right.
So basically, go out of your way to appreciate. Send that text message and let them know, like, hey, I understand. Thank you for sharing the word. And yeah, that kind of set off. I noticed the last few weeks,
Oh,
couple
wow.
of weeks, more people reaching out to me within my church saying, hey, thank you. This particular part of the message ministered to me. Yeah, and that's a true blessing for sure.
Every time I talk to you, you're like so excited about it. Like, you're definitely like, just at the edge of your seat. You're
About my
like, about your church and about, yeah, you're like a prize fighter. That's like, you can't keep out of the ring. You want to go in and like,
uh,
come on, let me at him. Let me at him. I love it.
what's weird about that is, I was talking with someone in my church about this, and they wrote me this letter. So
Uh-huh.
there's some girls in our church that decided to write handwritten letters to every member in the church.
Oh,
So
wow.
I got one too. And this girl is talking about how she had a conversation with someone else in our church years ago, and they said, "Oh yeah, Mitchell, Mitchell might not be like the most insightful preacher."
What?
Yeah. But no, it gets good. Don't worry, it gets good. But
Uh,
then he said, "But it's going to be hard to find another pastor that loves his church as much as he does." And then I was, to be honest, when I read that, I was like, actually, that's not that that's like, I'm not clowning other pastors, but it's what's true is like, yeah, I really do love my
yeah,
church. And I
yeah.
remember when I was younger playing sports, my mentality was kind of different because I remember we would play basketball, pick up basketball at the park.
Yeah.
And I used to prefer to be on the team that looked like it didn't have a shot to win. And then I genuinely would believe that we could actually beat the team that looked superior. So I preferred to be on the underdog.
Yeah.
And then that same mentality, I think, has kind of always been with me. And so I really do believe that I'm pastoring the best group in the whole world. Like I really, in my mind,
yeah.
I really believe that I have the best shepherds. I'm sorry, Pastor Eric. That's how
Hey,
I think.
I'm
Yeah.
sure Pastor Eric thinks the same.
Yeah.
Pastor Eric knows he has the best shepherds.
Yeah.
I mean, if from his point of view, this is like,
Yeah.
So it's awesome. I think I have the best shepherds too. I have two right now that are working very hard. I have one couple that's been commuting from San Diego. That's dedication right there.
There you
And
go.
I've been joking around that thanks to the coronavirus, they get a little break from the commute, but to not get used to it. So
yeah.
I
San
think
Diego.
yeah,
My gosh, that's
yeah,
2-hour drive, huh?
yeah. I mean, they stay when they come back, they stay over the weekend, and then they attend the Sunday worship with us, and then they go back. I mean, he's an engineer, and you got a good position over there. So, as a newlywed,
I might have to use that. I might have to use that. I might have to reference them when some of our people complain about, driving.
Well, I mean,
to
it's been hard for them. It's been very hard for them. It's been taking a toll, but I think that the rest and I mean, this can be kind of seen as a rest too. The prolonged time together, kind of in this restricted space, it's bringing up a lot of issues that people might have not noticed before, like tensions, issues that have been kind of going hidden and swept under the rug for many years, and these things are kind of beginning to emerge. And I think that God is really healing our nation through this, which was, I wanted your opinion on that. I wanted to hear your thoughts. Why is God allowing coronavirus to take over the entire world? This takes the attention of everybody. It's not just America. It's not just a regional. It's not just one section of the globe, but it's the whole world. This is definitely God's behind this, right? How do you interpret this? What are your insights on?
Man, to be completely honest, I'm extremely reluctant to pin it to one particular cause.
Okay.
So I think there's like a lot of factors, and unless God was to give us some type of divine insight into why, then I tend to stay a little bit back and say, obviously God has allowed it.
Yeah.
He has the power to put a stop to it instantly. We also know that there's a spiritual war aspect to this component. There's that layer where the enemy can also be behind it.
Right.
And then we also know that there's, like men and women that have, free wills, and they're making decisions that have consequences. And so, I think all these different factors, it makes it really hard for me to give a hard, this is why the coronavirus exists. But, I think instead of focusing on the why aspect, I think it's better that we try to just respond in a way that, we don't let this obstacle prevent us from growing in our walks with God. And we don't let this obstacle prevent us from advancing the gospel, despite our quarantine times. We just got to get more creative with it. Like Paul, when he was in Philippians 1, when he was in jail, he was quarantined. And then what he did was he just preached the gospel to the entire imperial guard that was there.
people would come and visit while he was
Yeah.
under house arrest to hear him
Yeah.
preach. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we
Yeah.
just have to be more creative in how we advance
Yeah.
the gospel and how
Yeah.
we do community, and you know.
I think during this, the Lord is still being glorified and honored. I think that allowing the whole world to be looking at one thing, perhaps, is a reminder. Hey, you
Yeah.
people, you know, it's me. I'm God, and this is
Mhm.
I can, like you said, I can make it come to an end like
Yeah.
that, and putting at
Yeah.
His people at attention.
Yeah. What do you believe about that question?
Um, no, I definitely believe that God's behind this. I feel this is like the one of the warning signs, or kind of like attention calling deeds
Mm.
out of many to come. And
Yeah.
I feel like it's going to get successively more harrowing and more difficult to, I mean, this is just the first initial kind of like dipping the toe in the pool kind of deal.
Yeah.
I mean, if you remember just back in history, and this is like referenced a lot by a lot of the media, the
Mm.
Spanish flu is known to have claimed from between 50 to 200 million. They don't even know how many people died.
It's crazy.
And the crisis that we see in the front lines is really kind of giving us vivid imagery of how serious the situation is.
Yeah.
But allow me to tell you that I've seen enough movies in my days to be able to imagine the catastrophe being just 100 times worse. It could
Yeah.
be so much worse. So
Oh yeah.
during this period, as I'm writing it out, I'm just praying to God, please let it pass. Let it
Mm.
pass with the minimum casualties. Let us come to repentance and thinking more eschatologically at the end of it all, like thinking more about the end times and having more
Yeah.
urgency about these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love, I used to teach eschatology.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was part of Calvary Chapel and pre-millennial and pre-tribulational.
Yeah.
Um, and then we would look at the signs and try our best to make the most out of them in light of scripture. And yeah, I really appreciate that idea of the expectancy, like
Yes.
living
Yes.
in expectancy that he
Yeah.
can come back at any moment, which I
Yes.
think is absolutely biblical.
Yeah.
But I think I agree with everything you said, by the way. But a part of me is like, okay, so what should we do if we are towards the end? We should be like Hebrews talks about, don't forsake the gathering together of yourselves,
Yes.
especially as you see the end coming near, right?
Yes. Yes.
So there's that idea, okay, we need to be even more entrenched in community, and then we need to be more passionate about preaching the gospel. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
so
Oh,
that's what
and
I felt.
by the way, when I talk about the end, the way I was taught when I was a new believer was that the end for one particular person, it could be the death of that person.
Yeah.
So this is actually making me face my own mortality with a
Mm,
lot more seriousness. Not just the end of the world that will come eventually.
I
We're
see.
talking about like also my own mortality of the loved ones. Like my parents are in their 80s now. My dad just turned 80, and it's forcing me to think about that. Like, oh
Mm-hmm.
man, it's gonna be a big bummer to not be able to touch them and to hug them, because this is like all very sentimental things when we're forced to
Yeah.
think about. But all the more because what is offered by God so freely is eternal
Mm,
life. I mean, you're gonna be
yeah.
able to see the loved ones being rejoined in heaven, being able to recognize
Mm,
the times you've spent in love with one another, and
yeah.
we would love to just continue to emphasize that. Uh, it- the,
Amen.
the the crisis makes that the valuation of those love moments much more
Mm,
precious.
amen. Yep. 100% true.
Any encouraging words for pastors that would be interested in joining the house church movement, for one, and then a more general word of encouragement for not just pastors, for all the believers and even unbelievers that may be riding this coronavirus quarantine together as a
Yeah.
global community, please.
Um, I think for us as pastors, I really, Ephesians chapter 4 talks about how Jesus gave gifts to the church, and those gifts are pastors, they're other Christian leaders. And then our job is to equip the saints, to train them for the work of the ministry. And yeah, I think there's always that tension as pastors that we feel between giving our people hope, and then also giving people the practical tools on how to engage in the mission of spreading the kingdom of Jesus, you know? But yeah, I think I want to just, if any pastors are watching this, to lovingly and courageously challenge their people and teach their people how to respond to this coronavirus in a way that really makes them outward focused towards their neighbors and the vulnerable and those that don't know Christ. And actually, if anything, teach your people that right now might be a golden opportunity that God has given us where people's hearts are more receptive. So, true story, this has happened just last night. I joined the online online poker virtual community of one of our members started it. And I just started getting familiar with this app. And this particular online poker game allows you to, everybody is like video chatting while we're playing online poker. And I'm in this group with random people. There was some people like speaking another language. This one guy sees me and he's like, "Hey, where are you from?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm LA." He says, "I'm from Toronto." There's this other guy, you could tell he's playing on his bed late at night because it's dark, his face is all dark. Yeah. And we're talking about what we do for a living, and he ends up leaving. This guy I didn't turn that into a spiritual conversation. The guy that was listening, and I didn't hear him talk, he ended up destroying me on a certain hand. He made me fold when I had already put a lot of money in. Not real money, by the way. This is all like
no gambling online here.
Yeah. But you know what happened was he said, "Hey, by the way, I heard that you were a pastor. How could I contact you? I'm going through some tough times." Oh. So there's other people that are watching this that I don't know. They're all over the world. And then I redirect them to our church website. And we have a very small conversation where he just says, like, this quarantine has been crazy. Yeah. And he wants to talk about how he can get closer to God again. And so I'm gonna be following up with him and set up some time with him. But yeah, right now there's a lot of people, like you said earlier, they've been shook to their core. Yeah. You know, they're really thinking about mortality. They're thinking about their loved ones. And we have the message of hope. We have the message of the resurrection, that death doesn't have the final say. Yeah. And so, man, we Christians, we have the remedy, actually. That's right. We actually have the greater remedy. Yeah. We have the greater vaccine.
The permanent solution.
That's right. Yeah. And so, yeah, I would just challenge pastors to challenge their Christians to give that out. And I know earlier we were talking about that tension of, you know, sometimes you share the gospel, sometimes you wait and build friendship. But there's also something to be said that there are times where you just have to just proclaim it and see what God does with it.
Right, you know? Right. Yeah, there's when you're led by the Spirit, for better or for worse, just, you know.
Yeah.
Drive it home.
Yeah, and then for non-pastors, for other Christians, that's my message, is just to trust the ability of God and the Holy Spirit, because it's really not our words and our work anyways that saves people. Right. We're just the means, we're just the tool. And so just trust that God is greater than our awkward conversations, than our insufficient knowledge, in our fears of what this might mean, that and God is able to use anything to bring people to him. Okay. You know, and for the lost, if there's anyone listening to this that's not a Christian, I would just say, you know, I think times like this remind us that there has to be something more than just what we see in this life, that there are things like love that is real. There are things like death that is real. And I would just encourage those people to take steps towards God and really reach out to a Christian that they know, and help and have that Christian hopefully guide them towards what pursuing God looks like in their life.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for being on the show. And the final product I hope you like.